Hello and welcome everyone to the main event. I'm Meeta and I'm really pleased today to be joined by my co-director, Carly Stevens. Hi, Carly.
Hi, Meeta. Yes, we haven't co-hosted for a while, so it's good to be back in the room together.
It really is. And we are talking the topic of internal recruitment teams today, which, considering as a talent consultancy, this is part of what we offer. We thought it would be great for us to be able to give our insights into the experience we have of working with and supporting internal recruitment teams as well, right?
Absolutely. It's been such an interesting time in recruitment, and I think that's why it's really useful to come together in the room today and just have a chat about what's been going on.
Yeah, absolutely. We know from the last 6 months there's been freezes, there's been budget cuts, there's been all kinds of things around hiring. So usually, well, as a consultancy, and while everyone's settling in, I'll just do a little bit of the housekeeping. So for those of you who've been before, I will be repeating myself, but it's just to say that today is an interactive session. It's very much for you as a subscriber, as somebody who is giving up your time to come on to take something away. And our promise to you is that we'll keep it succinct to about 45 minutes. We'll keep it interactive. So there's a chat room right here, but I'm literally going to say a hello on. So if you're in the room, and I can see I've got quite a few people jumping in now, please give us a hello. Let us know you can hear us, and let us know if you're well. And what I'd love you to do as well is just to let us know if you are a standalone person or a very small team, or if you're part of a bigger internal recruitment team. If you can just pop that information into the chat box, that would be great. And other than that, we've got a poll, because we always like to get a feel for what is going on for everyone in the room. So, Carl, would you like to walk through our poll for today?
Yeah, absolutely. So as Meeta said, it's really important for us to make sure we're giving you what you want today. And everybody, I think, is experiencing different things in recruitment at the moment. So this poll will help us see where everybody's at. So what we're looking at here is, what is your organisation's current hiring position? So you'll see the options there. Some of you are in a total recruitment freeze. Some organisations have got a replacement only hiring policy. Some are hiring but with no budget for agency support, where they might previously have been able to access agency support. Some are carrying on with hiring with agency support. Organisations, in other cases, are just maintaining their team size. They just don't need to hire anyone. And some are sadly in the position where they're reducing team size. So please do click on where you fit into that poll, just so we can get a feel for where everybody is.
Yeah, and we can gauge the room and the webinar for the next 45 minutes to some of those scenarios. So we've already got some questions that have been sent in before the webinar. That's something new we've started, where we're asking people what kind of challenges they're going through. But we'd love for you all to put what you want to get from today's webinar into the chat box. So I know the chat box is still a bit quiet. We've definitely got quite a few of you guys out there. So if we can get, we've got a hello from Elizabeth. Hi, Elizabeth. Thanks very much. If we can get a hello from some other members of the group today, just to know that everyone's out there, and just to let us know what your team structure is, and if you have any specific challenges, or if you're just in here to hear what we've got to say. I think, Carly, you and I, between us, have got something like 45 years of experience. And I mean, I would say that way back when, I know I started in the late 90s, it was almost like going from where companies were doing their own hiring to thinking, oh, I can outsource it to somebody. And it was almost a revolutionary relief. But over the years, a lot has gone where it's all been brought back in-house. What's your experience of where organisations are at the moment with internal recruitment teams versus agency partners?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And like with everything, there's a huge amount of variety. A lot of it depends on the organisation size and on the sector, and also what they're doing. But we have seen a big trend for even companies who have internal hiring teams still working with external agencies and providers in a lot of cases. And then in the last, I would say probably 18 months, we've seen a bit of a change to that, where some organisations are cutting their hiring teams, and some organisations are cutting their agency usage. So there is a real sort of blend of what's going on out there.
Yeah, and it's as you said, every organization has their own people strategy. And as part of that, whether they're hiring, staying the same or reducing team size will depend on if they're willing to invest in very heavy sunk costs of having a hiring team in place 24/7, which is great when you're going hell for leather. But what do you do in a time like this when perhaps hiring isn't as much of a priority, or there's, it could be just on a replace one as they leave basis? And as we know, there are even some organizations that are just not hiring at all. They're not even replacing when people go on maternity or hire or leave. So, we're going to talk a little bit as well about how can we make sure, if as an organization we have invested in a hiring team, how can we make sure that we're making sure they're more than administrators, that they're actually driving ROI, and that you as an organization are getting return on investment. So there's always pros and cons, isn't there? Because on one hand, when we've worked in an agency capacity with our client partners, the benefit of that is it's literally no win, no fee, right? Majority of that pay a small retainer, and then it's a fee upon success. Whereas with our internal team, you're paying that all the time. So again, that all depends on, I guess, recruitment budget and recruitment costs. What would you say, Carl, is the sort of feedback from organizations at the moment about their value for money from their internal teams?
Yeah, it's really an interesting one. So actually, somebody recently said to me that it feels almost like it's pandemic again in terms of the amount of hiring they're doing. But obviously in pandemic, there was support. There were things like furlough that teams could tap into, and there isn't that now. So there are some really creative ways that people are engaging their internal teams when recruitment is a bit quieter. So, for example, for a lot of organisations, it's a great time to look at all the work that has to get pushed to the side slightly when we're so busy in huge talent acquisition campaigns. So that might be things like looking at, bringing in a new applicant tracking system. It might be looking at your PSL and redefining that, looking at your terms that you've got with your suppliers, or even redefining your interview process. So there's a lot of things that you can be doing during this time.
Yeah, it could be a good time to almost do a 360 review of internal team, hiring managers of the team, and peer to peer. So a real 360 review where you could really start to gauge what's working, what needs refining, what needs upskilling, and what needs letting go of. Because as the markets change, your team requirements change, and the internal team's application of what they do may shift from candidate to internal management to marketing the brand. So there's so many different scenarios. So just looking at the poll at the moment, Carl, I'm looking that we've got 50% are hiring with agency support. Yeah. If that was you who answered that, are you hiring at a higher rate or a lower rate than usual? I'd love to know whether that is sort of all guns blazing or sort of reduced hiring expectation, just to get a feel. We've also got companies who we've got responses where a third are hiring but no budget for agency support. Yeah. So it'd be interesting to know if you had agency support before but no longer have it now and having to retrain your internal team. And we actually have 15% reducing staff size. So again, if you have an internal team or you have an internal recruiter, what do you do with those people if you're no longer utilizing them to go out and search for candidates? So we've got an array of scenarios that we're going to run through today, right, Carl?
Yeah, I think the poll really reflects what we're seeing is that every organisation is in a different position. So that's why there's so much for us to talk about today.
Yeah, so while we're just waiting for some comments, we've got some more hellos. Hello, hi, Abigail. Thanks for the highs, and good to know everyone's out there and hopefully gleaning some insights from our session today. Whilst we're just working out scenarios, what I'd love to do is break this down a little bit into areas of candidate control, how we manage the internal customer and making sure that we're all on the same page and aligning the narrative, and then also thinking about social impact and diversity and inclusion. Because if you've got a bit of room to breathe and it's not all guns blazing in terms of hiring, and you've got members of the team that are not as busy as always, let's take these people from being administrators of a process to what they really should be, which is a driving force for fantastic talent engagement and retention. That's what internal teams are, whether you're an individual, or part of an HR team where you're the only person recruiting, or if you're part of a talent team of 20 or 30, ultimately everyone who's in the place, it's what we do when we go out and represent clients out to market as well. We're marketeers, aren't we, Carls? And they're doing well for the world and for your people is so important, as well as being effective as an organization, like really making sure that we're honing in on what social impact we're making. So this is a great time to revisit that. So we're going to be looking at that. And then specialist sector advice, Carls, that's going to be one of your areas that you're covering, because as a consultancy, our main areas, we've got a not-for-profit practice, and then we've got a commercial practice, but within commercial, our main areas are consultancy and financial services. So we thought we'd focus on those. But again, if you're outside of that, let us know what sectors you're from, and we can bring you our insights, because we are very much at the rock face of what's going on in the hiring space. And we're going to focus on hiring. We do a lot of webinars on retention, but today is going to be all around hiring and how to really maximize the impact of your internal team or your internal person in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really interesting because different sectors are finding themselves with different unique challenges. So that's why we're going to drill down a little bit on that. But as Meeta says, do feel free to put what sector you're in the chat as well, because it would be really useful to understand who we've got in the room and give you specific advice. And actually, on a side note, I'd love people to tell us if wherever they are, summer has arrived there, because it's not properly arriving here, unfortunately, just yet.
I don't know, I've got a tiny bit of sunshine at the moment, but let's see how long it lasts. Well, we bring the sunshine today because we bring expertise and we bring approaches that will allow organizations who are thinking about how to upskill their teams and how to get more out of them to actually have tools to go away with. So where would we start? Let's talk about the candidate piece to start with, because candidate control, we put control there, but actually it's much bigger than that, isn't it, the candidate piece? And this can be done whilst hiring or whilst even in a freeze. Like, what would you say about the candidate piece for internal hirers?
Yeah, I think obviously candidate control is really important, but it very much links to candidate experience. And what we find, we talk to a lot of hiring teams and a lot of work seekers. And what we find is when there is a choppy or a volatile recruitment market, which we are definitely experiencing at the moment, sometimes that candidate experience can be impacted. And this is because, budgets are being slashed. We're seeing roles that were, full steam ahead to hire being cut midway through the process. And that's going to have a real knock-on effect on any candidates that you're engaging. So I think candidate experience is becoming more important than ever. And, sometimes what you're finding is the message internally isn't communicated. So therefore, how can it possibly be communicated clearly to the candidate? So communication is a really, really big part of working closely with your candidates and ensuring ultimately that if there is a candidate in process that you want to hire, that you are in a position to hire them. So that might be just bearing in mind timelines for feedback. There's a real challenge at the moment that job seekers talk to us about, which is about interview ghosting or job application ghosting, which is horrible practice, and it's really sad. And it's where candidates aren't communicated with after they've had an interview as to any feedback about how they performed or whether they've got the job or not. Now, quite often, organisations do fully intend to get back to a candidate, but for various reasons, there might be a delay in them relaying that feedback. But because people are so nervous about ghosting, often candidates read a delay as a ghosting. So just getting back
made their mind up.
Yeah, exactly. People make assumptions, especially if they have been through something like that. They think, well, I haven't heard for a couple of days, I'm not going to hear. And that can be really debilitating for a candidate. It can have a huge knock-on effect on their confidence and their ability to interview well at their next interview. So communicating with candidates about the process is really powerful. And even at the beginning, explaining to them, if, for example, your interviews are scattered over a few weeks, letting them know we're actually not completing the first round until, 2 weeks' time. So you're unlikely to get the feedback until then, just to ensure that they know when to expect to hear from you. So that's a big one.
It is. And I know you've spoken about the candidate experience there, but ultimately it all comes back on the employer, the potential employer, because when we are out flying the flag for our client brands, or if you've got your internal recruiters flying the flag for your organization, they're marketing the brand. And I can tell you what, these are, as you said, Carly, everyone has the best laid intentions, but it isn't always executed. So one thing I would definitely agree with, and we talked about this yesterday, actually, we had a client who wanted sort of 10 days between stage 1 and stage 2, and we had advised them to put their personality profiling and value profiling in the middle so that the candidate is kept engaged. And just little things like that, rather than having 10 days of nothing, but keep that engagement where they're feeling they're still part of the process and still feel engaged with, makes a lot of difference. So I think that we just expect that one size fits all, and how we treat one is how we treat everyone. Every candidate comes with a different personality, and just the sheer volume is one of the biggest challenges, right? The responses we're dealing with. So do use tech, do use automated responses. It may not be enough to alleviate concern, but at least it's enough to let them know they've been heard and seen and listened to, and that there is a call coming. Things like polls, you could even do polls out to your candidates to say, what is your experience of going through an interview process with us as an organization? And absolutely ask your agency providers. Like at the moment, the poll is actually saying that most people we have in the room are hiring with agency support. So if we are going to gauge some of the responses to people who do engage agencies, it would be very much about, have this expectation from your agencies. How are they engaging with candidates? How do they give feedback? How do they respond if there's a phone call? Are they ghosting people? Make sure you set out the sort of how you want your brand represented out to market.
Absolutely. That is so crucial. And just another thing, I think, on the candidate control and candidate experience piece is not making assumptions that candidates are going to be in the same position as they were when they first sent you their application. The market is evolving and it's changing constantly. And so I think checking in with candidates at every touch point about whether anything's changed for them. For example, they might have got to a point with another process where they've got an offer, and asking questions around that can help you to maybe tweak or speed up your process, or just be aware if you are at risk of losing a candidate. And this can even happen at offer stage. So you might think, great, we found the chosen candidate, we're going to offer them. Sometimes it takes a couple of days for the offer to get approved and put together. And if you're not communicating to the candidate in that time, that's actually where we see a lot of people losing a really great candidate. So even things like just keeping those timelines tight and ensuring that you're checking with your candidate where they're at is just super important, more now than ever.
Indeed. And actually, I would extend that even to once the candidate has started. So do a check-in. So one of the things that we always make sure we do when we have somebody start with our partner clients is we check in to make sure the person's arrived. Have they arrived on time? Are they suitably structured, attired, set up, ready to go, good attitude? And then we check in with the candidate, say, congrats on your first day. Let's touch base at the end of the day. It's not to unsettle, it's to give a voice, because really they know your internal recruiters as much as they know their manager on that first day. And over time you'll hand over, but don't do it as a sort of cliff edge of, right, that's it, they're never hearing from us again. It's a bit like when you want to buy something from a supplier and you talk to the salesperson, but then when they're delivering, you never hear from your salesperson. You think, well, I kind of bought into you, and it takes a bit of time to build up the trust and confidence with the person who's delivering the actual service. So it's the same with candidates. Be a buffer. So be part of the induction, do some check-ins with both parties. That's something that we do as standard when we're providing that external service, but don't take it for granted that your internal team are doing it. So make sure you build that in, because again, it's that candidate experience, which, look, ultimately, if we're doing our job right, we're doing ourselves out of a hiring job. If we can get every employee that we place in an organization to become an ambassador for the brand and go out to say to everyone they know, this has been such a lovely experience. I've loved the interview process. I've been kept informed. I've been treated with respect. Even when it was a no, people saw me as a human being and not just a bit of bother that they had to go through. And if I did start the role, I was really handed over, treated with kid gloves and onboarded with definitive certainty and support. And if that is the message, they'll be telling everyone about it. And then they'll be telling their own friends, come and work for my company, and use your internal teams to raise that awareness, especially now if it is quieter. get them to go out and do that internal ambassador work. What would you say, Carls, on that?
Absolutely. I think that's such an important point. And actually, job seekers who don't get the job but are treated well and treated with respect and well communicated with will come away with a really good feeling of the organisation and the process, which is going to protect your brand reputation. It's a little bit like there was a study about doctors who are much more likely to get sued by a patient just because they've got a rough bedside manner. And actually, it's all about how you make people feel and how you treat them. And if you're rejecting or declining people because they're not right, but with respect and authenticity and integrity, then your brand will be intact and you'll be leaving positive footprints. So absolutely key.
Indeed. So 2 halves of the poll, really. One half is using agency. The other half is hiring with no agency or reducing staff size. So there's going to be candidate engagement in many ways, because I'm a big believer. What we do when we go out and recruit is we hire for the role, but we also identify for the bench. So who would be a good future employee of the organization, and get your teams thinking ahead, get them identifying people and saying, listen, you're not right for this role, but we think that you'd be good for the company in the future. Can we keep in touch? And then whether you put them on a mailing list or you put them on a call pattern or something, those are future employees of the business, and you don't want to lose that opportunity. So that, again, is something that you can look at your applicant tracking system to see who you've put in that pool. And if you haven't, start now. Start benching people now.
Absolutely. That talent pooling piece is really important. And some people are making really good use of this slightly quieter time to do that. So I think next we were going to talk about managing the internal customer and aligning the narrative. It really feels important, Meeta, at the moment, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that where internal managers have had an internal team or an internal person or an external recruiter to go out and just, hey, this is what I need, please get it done. It's never that easy, but, that's the gist of it. They've kind of been able to sort of hand it over. Mm-hmm. Whereas now managers are getting pushback. We don't have budget. No, you can't hire for that person until a certain time. We're freezing. There's no hiring at all. So all of a sudden, you're not going to have the happy customer that you're working in alignment with. You're now going to have a customer that either isn't going to get what they want when they want it, or there's just a bit more friction in the process. And so peacetime versus challenging times, you're always going to have an internal customer. We talked about candidates as an external customer, so to speak. Your internal customers, your line managers, again, there's 2 ways of running this when you've got an internal team doing the work or an agency doing the work. But ultimately, the system and process is the same. It really is about starting by, first of all, understanding what the people strategy for the organization is. So that's going to be a decision that's made at boardroom level, perhaps with the head of people and the CEO at a board meeting, and something gets signed off. Let's make sure that's cascaded through from line managers through to the internal hirers, whether it's a team or an individual. And then that is also pushed through to when you do a kickoff for a quarter or a session with your people to know that this is what we're doing this year. So then when hiring managers are sent either an update or a change, they understand where we were and where we're going and why we need to change the approach. So keep them as part of the journey. Succession planning, really important to have that feedback with your hiring managers. Who do you identify as somebody who will be worth promoting in the future? A lot of the training our teams do, our training side, is on upskilling people that can do the job, but don't necessarily have the management skills. And so we help them create that succession. Every succession hire means you're replacing somebody at a more junior level with less cost and less risk than somebody at senior level, if you can get that pipeline working. But it requires that partnership with your hiring manager. So really think about that. And if you're using an external agency, make sure that they are doing that same level of engagement, onboarding and understanding. Our kickoff sessions can sometimes last 2 or 3 sessions, an hour to 2, sometimes face-to-face, sometimes on-site. The more we can get under the skin of our client's world, which your internal team will assume they have more access to, the better the outcome of hiring the right person. So understanding organizational needs, understanding the line manager's needs, I think is the beginning of it all. And getting a job description that is actually agreed by all parties, I think that is absolutely where it starts.
Yeah, absolutely. Just on your point about succession, Meeta, I think that's so interesting. There has actually been a real trend for internal promotions and internal hiring, which is fantastic for an organisation. It means you get to keep great people, progress them through their career roadmap, and then hire more going into the bottom of the funnel. So it's a fantastic way of doing it. And it's something that can sometimes be forgotten, and that can leave internal teams feeling like they haven't been considered for something, and that's going to lead to attrition, which means you're going to end up spending more on recruitment costs and spending more time than is necessary on hiring new people. So just a really key point there.
Yeah, very much so. And again, think about what skills people have versus what they don't have. There's always a solution to upskilling, but also think about working to people's strengths. You know, a lot of organizations now are really trying to not have this one size fits all, but really driving forward what skill sets people have and aligning their roles to that. So don't be afraid of being a bit broader and a bit bold in the way that you channel your hiring expectations and the types of people you want to bring on board. I think internal job postings are as important as external job postings. Again, some organizations, especially in the charity sector we have, and government bodies, they always have to advertise internally for a period of time. Very often when we're working with these organizations, they'll say, right, well, we've got to advertise it for 2 weeks. Then, you know, it will give you the feedback of who's there, and they might put them through the external hiring process as well to have a good consistent approach to the interview process, because it's got to be fair, right, Carls? I mean, ultimately, if somebody's hiring, it's got to have that diversity piece and that equality piece stamped throughout the process. We'll go on to that, but it's very key.
Absolutely.
So internal job postings, be really transparent, use the intranet, word of mouth, get it working on every level, get it working on social media, get it working on your job pages. Ultimately, you want your internal recruitment team to be the brand ambassadors for the voice of going out and bringing new talent. So have a look at your website, make sure that the voice of the people you've hired, the internal recruitment team and the line managers is one. Because when you have interview processes and your line manager does one, HR does another, and the internal recruitment or the agency do another, if there is disparity, candidates get spooked. What do you think a candidate picks up if they get one experience? You want different personalities, but if they're told one thing by one and one thing by another, what do candidates take away from that, Carls?
It's one of the most off-putting things for a candidate, and we hear it from work seekers a lot, that they were told one thing at one round and then a different person in the process at the next stage has got conflicting information for them. And it's usually nothing sinister, it's just communication internally that hasn't been properly aligned, but that will make a candidate get a sense that there's some sort of disconnect, and it can make them feel really uneasy. And all candidates, one of the main things they're looking for is stability, security, clarity about where they're going to be going. So anything like that can really alienate candidates. So yeah, those internal comms are so important for that reason.
Indeed. And I think also we've touched a bit on fair assessment, and we'll go into what a diverse process looks like, but get feedback from your managers as well. So something we do when we work externally on hiring is we do a quality audit check. So once we've done the work, we will call the line manager, we will call the internal hirer or the HR person and say, how was that experience for you? Did we do everything you had expected us to do? Was there anything else we could have done? Are there things we should have done differently? What are the things you want us to stop doing? I mean, literally a deep dive. And it doesn't have to be more than 10 minutes. It could be on a phone poll, it could be written, but ultimately pick up the phone and have a chat, you know, and just speak to your line managers about what the expectation was versus the outcome. Because again, that will clarify, was the scene set correctly to start with? Was the role onboarded correctly? Was the process applied consistently and correctly? And then what has the candidate experience been? And ultimately, have they stuck? Have they joined? Have they stuck? Is retention high? Because as we know, it's all very well hiring people in, but the reason we are all about recruitment and retention is it's the retention piece that really gives the business their ROI on their internal hiring.
Absolutely. I'm a massive advocate for that continual review of processes. What went right? Let's keep it. What can we learn from what went wrong? And making sure that we see it as an ability to learn, not a blame scenario, but just to what do we learn? What can we do differently? And you only get that from analysing the process and engaging all parties and getting that 360 feedback. There's so much information out there that hiring teams can access if they want to. And it's just about asking the right questions.
Absolutely. So when we've come into auditing this process for our clients who have internal teams, we talk about that word that so many companies feel a bit uncomfortable about, KPIs. But we don't call it KPIs. We call them success drivers, because you ultimately want to see if your people who are responsible for hiring, especially if you've got a bigger team, how are you supposed to establish what 20 people are doing at any one time and whether they're effective or not? Absolutely, you can measure outcome. But against what? If one person is working on 20 internal roles versus 10, but the person who's done 10 has got all 10 filled, and the person who's got 20 has only got 8 filled, if all you're measuring is output, they both look pretty on par. But if you actually establish what's going into the funnel, then you can start to understand people's strengths, people's challenges, gaps in knowledge and expertise, what training they need and upskilling, and ultimately what their strengths are, and perhaps working more to that. So I just wanted to run through, look, for us as an organization, we measure ourselves on our ability to be efficient, effective, impactful, and connecting with our clients. But there's also a rate at which we need to ensure that there's work being done to just make sure we've got enough candidates in our network, to make sure that we aren't interviewing people that aren't right for our client community. So, because I picked up a few success drivers that I think would be worth measuring. And I think one of them would be how many registrations recruiters are doing. So you could measure your recruitment consultancy and ask them these questions. I think if you're going for a PSL, it's really important to know how your recruitment consultancy are replenishing their network. But if it's an internal team, let's establish how many are they interviewing versus how many they're putting forward for interview itself. Are they just busy fools where they're just doing a lot of conversation, or are they actually identifying the right people? And if they're not, let's look at how they can get better at screening before they bring people on Zoom or in to actually spend time, because ultimately time is the one value that you can't get back, right? So how are internal hirers utilizing their time?
Yeah, absolutely. That interview to hire rate is a really interesting stat to have a look at. And also I think time to hire is a really powerful one as well. Hiring times can vary hugely, and it's not necessarily a reflection on the internal recruiter or the recruitment team. It might be that something's out of sync in terms of what we're looking for. Maybe the salary's not high enough for what we're pitching. So there's all sorts of data that you can work with.
I think in time to hire as well, I think it becomes a real budgetary challenge if it's not aligned with understanding. Line managers' expectations and reputation therefore get impacted, where the line manager was told 6 weeks and it's turned out to be 3 months. We very often place temps into roles where the old person's gone and the new person hasn't started yet, to cover that, which is another cost that the company hadn't necessarily budgeted for. So let's look at these time to fill. You will pick up patterns, and we actually design success driver measures for clients. We just start with 1 or 2 to start with, and then we build on that. So yes, you said registration to fill and interview to fill. And again, I think that 360 feedback. So if you've got an internal recruiter, let's get feedback from a teammate, a manager, a line manager, a candidate. Let's get some scores of what impact has been and how effective they've been. We all want praise when we've done it well, and we all want to know if there's areas of improvement, right? Because nobody wants to be doing a bad job.
Absolutely. And I think once you have a body of data, you can really start looking at interesting trends that come up. And you might find that it's just certain roles within your organisation where there's challenges. And then you can have a little closer look at that and why that's happening.
Yeah, very much so. Carl, is there anything else you think we need to cover in terms of aligning the narrative and making sure everyone's on the same page when it comes to a business or an organisation hiring?
I think we've covered a lot there. I think just to reiterate that it comes down to communication and that flow of communication and not making assumptions. Sometimes things will change during a process, and a hiring manager might decide, actually, I'm going to up the salary band on this role, but they don't necessarily communicate it to the recruitment team in time, or to the agency if there's an agency in place. And just things like that, quick communication can have a massive impact.
Yeah. Thank you. That's such a good point, actually. It's being on everyone on the same page. Communication is where it begins and ends, right? The success.
Always.
Okay, so we've got about 10 minutes left. We've got a quiet room today. We've still got lots of you guys in the room. So hopefully this is interesting and useful to you. We do have some questions, which actually will go into our next section. But if you do have any questions or any thoughts, please share them with us, and we hope that you are finding today's session useful. One of the areas that really is coming up now is all around hiring for equality and diversity. In fact, for us as a business, we've actually committed to pillars of purpose for 2024, and I'm going to look at them because I don't want to get them miscommunicated, because they're so important. And you as an organization will have that same plan where you are not just about hiring, but you're hiring a team that reflects the world out there. You're hiring a diverse team. You're hiring people that are so diverse that they add value. And we know that financially, culturally, diverse teams are more successful. They create better ROIs, they create better profit lines, or if you're a charity, they create better funding success. And ultimately, teams who are diverse are happier. They feel represented. So our 4 areas of purpose in terms of hiring and retention are sustainability. So the ESG piece is very much around sustainability. So what are we doing as an organization when we're doing the hiring and training to make sure that we are sustainable and that our clients are sustainable? Right through to we plant trees every time we make a placement or we do some training. It could be anything that aligns you and your people, but make sure you're having the conversation. And then equality and diversity is really key. Social impact is really key. That's our 3rd pillar of purpose. So equality and diversity, I'm going to go into in a bit more detail, Carls, but social impact, having people from underrepresented areas. And our 4th is still women in business. You can talk about all particular characteristics, but we still don't have equality of women at work. So those are our 4 pillars of purpose. For any company out there looking at what their organization's focus is going to be, where would it all start? Would it start with a job description and using the right language? What would you say? What have you come across?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it even starts sooner than that. It's about the organisation's heart and their mission and who they want to be. But as you've said, Meeta, there's so many extraordinary benefits of hiring a diverse workforce. And actually, I saw a really interesting study recently that said 77% of people would leave an organisation if they didn't think that the company was focused on hiring a diverse workforce, which I thought was fascinating. So this is going to mean that if you're not promoting diversity, you're going to lose people, you're going to have attrition. There's also stats to say that there's, like you said, much less happiness in less diverse teams. So it is so important for so many reasons, both in terms of the people first approach, but also from the organisational goals. I think it comes back to the very beginning, conversations that we're having, even in the pre-hiring, even in the DNA of the organisation. And then it's all about communicating it, getting the team involved, consulting with the team, training the team, making sure that everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, language is so key. So not just having neutral language in job description or adverts, but make sure you've got neutral language that avoids gender bias across the organization. So, anyone that goes in and does an interview is going to be aligned with that. And the candidate comes away with a feeling of trust and confidence because everything they've seen is building on the consistency of what they've heard the first time. Also, expanding recruitment channels. Now, the beauty of having a diverse workforce is that you can ask all of your workforce to go out and ask their networks, and therefore you can start to attract diverse workforce. But also, there are job boards that can access a more diverse workforce.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would also say that blind recruitment processes are really helpful. We have clients that do it, clients that don't do it. It is very personal, but it is an option. You can have completely anonymized CVs, and you can have completely structured questions where actually people are asked exactly the same question at every stage of the interview. And that takes a lot of internal training and a lot of control. So something else to think about in terms of making sure that you've got diversity at the core of your interview process. And then make sure your interview panel are diverse, show your candidates who is representing the organization. And as you said, Carly, right from the start, it's not about, oh, we're hiring, let's tell everyone what to do. Keep this training and awareness ongoing. We do a lot in unconscious bias training. Get people aware of where their unconscious bias is, because that has to be a definitive step, a really mindful step to counter unconscious bias. And make it part of your culture. Sorry, go on, Carl, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, I think that's such a good point. I mean, the point of unconscious bias is that we're not aware of it, right? So actually, when we do training around it, it really is a deep dive, and it really is something that some people can find uncomfortable because they're having to deal with personal barriers, things that they didn't even know were in place. But the only way to really combat unconscious bias is to go through that process of discomfort and understand it in a really trusting and supporting way, so that people can come out the other side of it and be more enlightened.
And do you know what, Carls? Even though this is a topic that has been right at the forefront since COVID, especially because we were all able to start working on our organizations, just not in the day-to-day, there are still people out there who said, oh, I didn't realize. So again, make no assumptions and get everyone. It has to be a leadership commitment that then cascades throughout the organization, and get leaders talking about it, get leaders championing it, get leaders just leading by example, walking the walk. That is so key. And I would say measure, like we've talked about success drivers for internal hirers. Let's start measuring, how is our diversity metric working? Are we getting the right number of people? We as a partner, we always say to our clients that with our pillars of purpose and our positive intention of ensuring a diverse workforce, we measure and can provide you with reports on our diversity success and effectiveness. We have diversity metrics. So if that's something you want to put in place, just start with a couple or talk to us. We can tell you what to measure. Or if you do work with us and we are providing, let us give you a diversity report. It's really important that the partners you engage with, who you have on PSLs, are doing that diversity piece for you. And it's definitely a question you should be asking.
Absolutely. Because there are unfortunately times where it can feel like it's a tick box. It's something's rolled out, but it's not necessarily trained internally or embedded into the culture. And these things need to be refreshed. They need to be talked about. And some of the best workshops we've run on EDI are the ones where the team are all fully involved and there's psychological safety for them to say how they feel. And then the ideas flow, and it's wonderful. And that is diversity in itself.
Yeah, for the people, by the people, allows everyone to feel they have a voice, a seat at the table and a voice at the table. And that is eat, lived and breathed throughout the organization. And the feedback, the engagement, the productivity, the success, it literally is like a waterfall effect. It all flows. So definitely worth starting or engaging your partners or saying to us, what does good look like? What should we expect? Whether it's our internal team or our partners, we can help you with that. Carl, we've got a few minutes left and I'm very conscious of people's time, and everyone who's jumped in has stayed on, so thank you for that. I would love to hear your thoughts on specialist sectors and what they should be thinking about in this time.
Yeah, absolutely. So as discussed, we work with a lot of sectors, but our main sectors that we operate in are the not-for-profit and charity space. And then on the commercial side, we work in the majority of cases with consultancies and financial services organisations. So in terms of looking at charities and not-for-profit, one thing that we're finding is historically those organisations will have a deadline for applications, and then they'll all be reviewed, and then they'll run, a really tight, a really balanced process, which is brilliant. But some of those organisations are finding that because those timelines are so rigid, they're losing a lot of people along the way at the moment. So what we found is some non-profits are finding that they can actually improve their overall hiring if they're being less rigid, maybe reducing timelines and just being a bit more fluid around that. And that's really helping them to ensure they're hiring the right people.
Yeah, good people go quick. So if there's a closing date of 3 or 4 weeks, they've gone. So don't be a sitting duck. Own your process and control.
Yeah, exactly. And so you find that in organisations where they're more likely to just meet great candidates as and when they present, they are more likely to hire their person of choice. So that's just something to consider. But you have to balance that with a very balanced and fair process as well.
Okay.
And then for consultancies, this is a really interesting one. The nature of most consulting firms are that they work on a project basis. So they need to staff up for various projects. And in this market, what we're finding is talent pooling for consultancies is really important. So thinking about who's on the bench, and not actually just in the consultancy space, but actually also in the support space as well. Because when you ramp up on your consultants, you need to ramp up on your ops and admin support as well. So looking at talent pooling, whether you're doing that internally or engaging your agencies to help you with talent pooling. Most agencies will be really expert in talent pooling and benching. So definitely something you can ask them about.
Yeah, very much so. And what I would also say is that it's a time when you actually think about the not just benching, but who again is internally there that you think could be upskilled and brought up into your organization as well. And in terms of financial services or professional services, what would you say those sectors should be thinking about, Carl?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting one. We're all hearing about lots of organizations asking their employees to come back to the office on a greater number of days. Some cases are going to just Fridays at home, and some companies are saying 5 days a week in the office. A lot of those companies are in the financial services space. And what we're finding is that when that is the case, the time to hire rate is extended by sometimes up to 8 times. The candidate pool for complete office-based work is still really low. There's still a real push from work seekers for hybrid and remote working. So if you can have some flex on that, I think you're more likely to be able to hire the best people and the ones that you want to hire.
I think people stay longer in the role as well. Having said that, we recruit for we do the 5 days right through to the 2 in and 3 out. So we're open, and even fully remote roles still on occasion.
We do, absolutely. And we can find people for companies that want them in 5 days in the office, but it does usually take longer. And it's a smaller pool, which sometimes can be restrictive in the market the way it is at the moment.
Yeah. And again, I think where there's an internal member dealing with line, it's important to make them aware of that. So expectations can be managed. And again, budgets considered. And so we're not creating big gaps in accessibility to talent. We're finding a lot at the moment, contractors are being used and temporaries and interims, where there's a hiring freeze. That in the poll, actually, we've got replacement only hiring at 11%, reducing staff size at 11%. So both of those, there will be a challenge of hiring permanently, but they can often be a solution of a project-based interim or temp, or somebody for a contract, especially maternity and things like that. So there are always other solutions. Hiring managers, if they've got people leaving because they've just got too much work, again, that's going to be a cost to the organization, and then future hiring, unnecessary costs again. So there's just so much to think about, because when we actually broke down all of our topics, we realized that we could probably do a session on each one. But we hope that this has been a useful overview to our audience today on internal hiring, partnering with your recruitment partners if you have them, and how to really get the best out of your teams and get the best communication going with your line managers to make these successful processes. I'm just going to go through the poll. So actually, in the end, our room was 44% still hiring with agency support, 33% hiring internally, but with no budget for agency. So hopefully we've covered both sides of that, where if you've got an internal team only, or if you've got partners, external partners. And then the other two were the replacement only hiring or actually reducing staff size. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to publish that poll so you can all see as well. Thank you to everyone that's joined today. Carl, as we're doing a parting comment, what would you say to everyone in the room for them as a takeaway?
Yeah, I think the poll's really interesting. So I'm just going to speak to those of you are hiring with no budget for agency support. Just bear in mind that some agencies, and we included, can offer a deconstructed service. So rather than a full process, what some organisations are offering is to do part of the recruitment process for organisations where they don't have budget. So if that's something that might be relevant for you, that's definitely something that you can consider talking to your providers about.
What's the most popular one that you're finding our clients are on?
CV filtering is the most popular one because organisations will be inundated with direct applications and they're used to having an agency go through them for them. So that's a popular one. But also first round interviews and getting to a short list. It's so much more cost effective than the full process and it saves a huge amount of time.
Brilliant. Amazing. Carly, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you to everyone who's been in the room and taken part in the poll and given us a shout out. And we'll be back next week with another webinar. And we're usually here on a Wednesday at midday, at least 2 or 3 times a month. So please keep a lookout for the interviews. And if you have any topics that you'd like us to cover, please pop it into the comments bar. We will take note and you will see those webinars coming up in the future. But for now, we're going to say goodbye. Thanks all.
Thanks everybody. Thanks, Meeta.
Bye for now.
Bye.